Good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all our valued and esteemed guests. Thank you very much for joining us for our first webinar session with Ipsos for the year, titled Context Now for the first half of 2026. Arun will be sharing a bit on how on the conflict and consumer shifts in 2026. Before we proceed, I'd like to share with all the guests on the call today a few housekeeping rules. Firstly, just to share with everyone, happy to share that the webinar session today is being recorded. So you will be able to share, will be able to have a look at the recording after the webinar session is over. A kind reminder to all of our guests today to kindly please mute your microphones to ensure we do not have any interruptions to the session today. And if you would have any questions that you'd like to ask Arun, you may leave them in the chat box, or you may use the raise hands function to ask any question directly to Arun at the end of the session. So we look forward to a very engaging, exciting, and insightful session from Arun. Thank you again for everyone for joining the session today. And I would now like to pass the floor over to Arun. Over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Sufyan. Good afternoon and welcome to Ipsos webinar on Context Now. As Sufyan mentioned that we have done some events in the past in early this year, and this is the webinar which we would want to address some of the topical issues throughout the first half of this year. Right? It's a conscious effort from Ipsos to give a perspective on our ever-changing world from a perspective of a market, consumer, and society overall. Today's discussion and the sharing session would involve information from our longitudinal surveys, which is a global survey called Ipsos Consumer Confidence and What Worries the World, which is run across 30 countries, along with the social intelligence data, which we put together using our generative AI applications, and finally, including some information from a macro context from our strategy 3 service lines as well. So we walk through few of the aspects, first starting with the confidence shift and drivers, moving into how consumers are adapting to the shifts, and at the second part, we will try to address the nation brands, right? So between nation brands and consumer confidence, we believe that these are the two pivots that's happening post-Iran conflict, right? At the end, we will also look into what's the implication for us and for the businesses. Now, moving on to the next part, the first section, we would want to see how the confidence has been shifting over a period of time. So Malaysia has been quite resilient over the last few months compared to our regional economies and the global in general. We had steady performance of the ringgit and the economy. And as you can see that, we have two data points which we are sharing from the global average of consumer confidence and how Malaysia has been trend. As you can see from September to March onwards, we were on a steady ascent, right? And this has been, parallel by the appreciation of the ringgit as well at the same period of times. Now we have reached somewhere close to 3.9 versus the US dollar as well. So this has been a resilient phase of the Malaysian economy. And we have seen the most confident during this time was our Gen Z. Indirectly, the confidence is inversely proportional to the population, right? So population age. So a Gen Z would be the most positive when we're looking at the consumer confidence, and somebody who's a baby boomer would be a less positive on consumer confidence compared to other age bands. We have seen a steady ascent of Malaysian consumer confidence, but over the last month, as you can see, there is a drop. Move into the next slide. Oops. So there's a 6.1% drop for Malaysia's consumer confidence compared to what we had in the past. So currently it stands as 54.8, and in April and in March it was 6.1 higher, right? It's not only Malaysia. We have seen this reflected across the globe. The global consumer confidence from the time that we have been tracking has seen the biggest drop of 2.7. This is an average of the results across 30 countries, and we've done around 20,000 interviews every month to capture this information, right? Asian economies, particularly the ones in Southeast Asia, has seen some of the biggest drop, Thailand being 10.9 percentage, 10.9 points drop, and also our regional countries like Singapore and Indonesia. The same is reflected in markets like Japan and Korea, where we have seen a significant drop. One of the things which concerns globally, and this has been shared across all the world population, is the inflation. So inflation has gone up by 4 points, and then and in Malaysia it has gone by 8%, right? So compared to the previous year. The other aspect which has seen the shift is that concern, the global and Malaysian concern on the military conflicts between the countries as well. A market like Thailand has seen the biggest impact of inflation. So in March, they were in deflation. That means that the prices were actually trending low, lower. And in April, it's completely turned around to an inflation. A market like Japan has seen biggest inflation in the last 3 years as well. So this shift is already signaling us to something, right? And particularly in Malaysia, around 36% of the Malaysians are concerned about inflation, and 18% are concerned as a 9% increase in terms of military conflict overall. One of the things which is triggering, of course, is that when is the conflict in Iran is ending, right? Some of them draw parallel to the conflict that is happening between Ukraine and Russia, which has not, over the many years, has seen a closure yet, right? So majority globally thinks that the conflict is going to drag on, and it will take more than 3 months as well. Around the 30% across the world and this region as well thinks that it will go beyond this year, that it will drag to 2027 as well. More than the conflict itself, that unpredictability of what's happening this week versus next week, because a resolution to a flaring up is, this fluctuation is actually unnerving people and making things much more anxious. And fuel shock has a ripple effect across the economy, and something like as major as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has impact across the supply chain and the system as well, right? So if you are playing in an FMCG category, and if you are producing your goods locally, your agricultural aspect would be impact because of the fertilizer prices going up. The packaging will be impacted because packaging, particularly the plastic packaging, depend a lot on the fuel as well. So is manufacturing, logistics, and by the time it's reached at the consumers at the retail shelf, there is a cumulative impact of the inflation over the period of time. As much as government is trying to manage it and balance the financial discipline versus the price rise, or the companies are trying to balance it between keeping their balance sheets in a positive territory versus passing the prices to the consumer and affecting their market share. It's a big trade-off for many of the entities across. And for the consumer, the worry of inflation is very much evident. We have sweep through around 3.6 million data points related to social intelligence data using our generative AI application to find out what the social media has been saying about the conflict as well. It's in a lot of sense mirror what we have seen as a macroeconomic situation as well. Most of the concerns are on the fuel subsidies and physical sustainability. That was one of the top conversation. And 30% of the Malaysians, 29% of the Malaysian has been negative about the conversation at the overall level. As you can see, the trend, it has peaked in early March and it's been slowing down in April over a period of time. At the beginning, it was about the subsidy strain and whether the subsidies will be completely revoked to balance the financial physical risk for the government. And it ended up as how does the farming cost and SMEs are going to survive in this kind of situation at the overall level, right? And when we look the negative sentiment, the public perception, it has been fluctuating over the period of time. In the past, it was predominantly on the fuel subsidy and physical stability. We have tracked it till 26 March or early May phase. In the past, it was on the fuel subsidy, whether we are working from home, working from away, government regulation and all that. Now it's increasingly about the inflation and the SME resilience as well, right? So whatever that we have discussed in terms of the macro, it is a reality and everyday life for the Malaysian consumer, as we have seen here. It's also indicate that though there are a lot of effort from the government in terms of policy relief, it has not much translated into building consumer confidence at the overall level. Now, we have spoke about the pressure drivers of the consumer confidence and the inflation in itself. Now we want to see that how our consumers are restructuring or adapting into this scenario. So the primary thing what we have seen in our global study is that, as you can see on the right, at 12% is saying that they are not going to make major purchases. That means that those who are in the property industry or those who are in the automotive industry and even the financial industry, right? You would see an impact if consumers are delaying the major purchases or avoiding the major purchases altogether, right? But it also has an impact on the day-to-day household purchases as well. They might be trading down and adapting or restructuring how they are actually doing the consumer purchases as well. Of course, there is a less appetite for investment when there is uncertainties globally as well. What we have noticed in April that the job security itself, there are only 9% less people who are confident about their job overall level, right? So this is more of a concern if you are of, a baby boomer who is working, or, a Gen X person who is actually working, and or Gen Z who is starting his career, right? We have seen that millennials particularly is more confident about as a consumers are more confident about job security and in the overall outlook itself, right? Because they have a reasonable understanding of their, companies and businesses and where they are at the overall. This pattern shift is something that is worth noting for us, right? And we can learn a lot from the precedent set, right? So we have some global precedent in terms of, fuel shock, particularly the gas, during the Ukraine war at the beginning of it. And what we have learned from our colleagues in the Europe is that 50% of the European consumers have changed their behavior at the onset of the Ukraine war, particularly, and how they have changed it. One aspect is that they are cutting out the dining out aspect, going out and spending, because the fuel prices has gone up, the restaurant prices has gone up, so I'm not going to go and eat out, right? But it has benefited a bit for the grocery retail. They're actually eating in. That means that you are buying more grocery retail, but probably have traded down a bit in terms of the consumption per se, right? But one thing is very clear: the brands which is trusted has continues to be trusted throughout the war, right? They, it is as long as you can give the reliability and affordability, the trusted brand will continue to be leveraged more during that crisis, particularly. We can see some signals from some of our regional country, particularly in India, which has been hit by LPG, which is the cooking gas, particularly, and it's actually changing the cooking behavior. It's quite interesting when you actually cook on the gas versus when you are cooking on an electrical stove, the way you cook actually change. So if you are an FMCG category, this is something that you need to be noting as well. So how does your product adapt to that, right? More simpler, low heat cooking and less time on the hob is something if they are moving towards, does it affect the behavior in terms of the purchase as well? And we can see that, Thailand, which is a major importer, Indonesia, Philippines, and all these markets which are relying on cooking gas, and even some part in Malaysia as well. This is something that worth noting as well, how we actually moving forward. Then, as we said, it's not as reduction. As during the COVID, we have noticed that people are actually reduced spending, they are not going out and everything, right? We are seeing a restructuring of how we are actually spending and consuming things. That's what we have noticed during the last couple of months per se. Part of it is that the persistent inflation. Inflation is not new to Malaysia, and only the last few months is actually amplified. The rising urban living cost is not new to Malaysia as well. So there has been a trend in terms of behavior. It's only getting amplified during this crisis. What we happens is in terms of behavioral trend particularly is the concept of affordability and what is the essential for me. Malaysian seems to have a clear idea and shift towards what defining this. The second thing is that we seems to be more disciplined in terms of our financial planning and having a reserve in terms of spending. When you have COVID and when we have this now, the repeated onslaught within the last decade itself, making consumers very cautious in terms of having a reserve for them to spend. And most importantly, at the end, is more conscious in terms of consumption. We are highly sensitive into, even a slight price change. So if you are trying to adjust your prices, even by, very small decimal point, it would definitely be noticed, right? So that's where consumers are very alert. One of my, client has highlighted to me, this behaviors has actually helped them, right? So you might be actually canceling a vacation abroad because the fuel prices are up, airport is up, right? But you would want to splurge your money on something because you still have money. You're not saying that, I cannot afford to travel to, say, Taiwan or Indonesia or to Thailand, right? But I can go for a beauty treatment, which is very much within my budget, right? So some of the categories can actually leverage on the aspect that, oh, I'm not going to do a major spending, but that doesn't stop me from doing a minor spend at the overall level. And that's definitely an opportunity for all of you to look into. Before I summarize, I want to take a pivot on a different aspect. We spoke about inflation and cost of living, which is an outcome of, the recent Iranian conflict per se. But we would also want to understand how brands, particularly the nation brands, has been viewed during this crisis. And why is this nation brands important? So in a lot of sense, a lot of the consumer brand leveraged on the country of origin to build their trust, which we call within a research term called halo effect, right? So I would rather buy a Japanese, electrical devices or a German engineering device because I trust their quality and I don't worry about it, it will break down in future, right? That's a trust which given by the country itself because they have rigorous standards per se. I am more happy to buy a French champagne at a higher price than an Asian champagne, right? Because I'm willing to pay for more a Swiss watch, right? And I would go for a Mexican tequila because when you think of tequila, you automatically think of Mexico, right? The storytelling, authenticity. So they would say that however that is being produced, since it is coming from Mexico, I would rather vouch for that, right? But it's not just those brands on the Western hemisphere, right? It's also on the Eastern side. Like, we will go for the Korean beauty treatment or cosmetic product because Korea stands for that innovation on that spend, right? Or you would go for products from Norway or Sweden because they have, very good ethical sustainability standards per se, right? And this has been wired into us as a script, right? When we actually make product choices, we automatically screen out a product, some say probably East Timor or like, South Sudan. I would rather go for something from Malaysia or Dubai because I would trust those countries and I would get a better brand or product from those markets as well, right? But one of the biggest brand, nation brand, which is the USA, which has been supporting their product, has been taken a huge hit as part of this Iranian conflict, right? Now, only 34% of the Malaysians believe that the US has a positive influence. This is, way different than 83% of the Malaysians thinking that China would have a positive influence moving forward. Now, imagine the brand which has been associated with China or linked to US performing in your local market. Which brands do they think have a positive influence? It's quite interesting for me to see from two aspects that Iran has more positive influence than the US in the globe. That's what Malaysians think. Right. So that's quite interesting to see. But it's also interesting for me to think that compared to our, neighbors in Singapore, Malaysia have more positive perception of China. Only 71% in Singapore think that China has a positive global influence compared to 83% in Malaysia, right? So the China has overtaken the US significantly from a 39% global average for the US compared to 50% positive perception for China, which is a dramatic shift how the brands have been seen from each of these countries globally. So, and that's not new, right? So I don't know whether I pronounced it correctly. I don't know. Some of you would have seen about Pursuit of Jade, which is a drama on Netflix. It's pronounced a Ju Yu or something, but in China, in Mandarin. But it's adding into a wider culture called China Maxing, right? So you know, Chiang Ling-hei or the Foundation General has been catapulted by the drama itself. But it has opened a new section for Chinese drama and Chinese content, not just for Southeast Asia, but the wider Asia and the global brands itself, right? But it's not just that, along with that drama, there's a lot of discussion happening in Xiaohongshu or in WeChat or in TikTok as well, which is actually pushing more of the Chinese content and culture, not just for the Malaysian Chinese, as you can see in that a lot of the Malaysian Malays and Malaysian Indians are following that, right? So the influence comes as what we call the soft power of the countries comes in multiple forms. The culture is one, commerce is another, right? And it is being reflected in the brands that we consume in Malaysia across sector and category after category. Now, when you think of renewable or like EV, you will think about a Chinese car, right? And we can see that when we track this in 2024 and 2025 period, Chery and Geely already making sizable conversation over the social media, right? When you think of mobile phone, you think of Xiaomi, or or Huawei on the other side, right? When you think of a drink, you think of Jiaji or Misui, So these brands are making a heavy impact. So it's like if I if you think for yourself, like 5 years before COVID, most of this brand didn't have any impact in Malaysia. Now they are significantly present in everyday life. One of the aspects that they play into as the inflation and cost of living, is increasing. Chinese brands are offering an affordable, but at the same time, high in quality products and services, right? It opens a completely new competitive sets for brands operating in Malaysia and the wider Southeast Asia. And for many Chinese brand, Malaysia is the launch pad into this region, right? As you would have seen that many of their brands are doing very well. Nobody has done this crisis to opportunity conversion as good as BYD, right? They are in a sweet spot, right? When the fuel crisis happens, they are actually an EV company, which is actually pushing EV products in Malaysia, right? Where the Chinese influence is, or the soft power or the positive opinion of the Chinese brands are building up, they are a Chinese brand as well. But what they have done better in Malaysia is that, they have built their ecosystem, which encourages more EV companies to come to Malaysia. And of course, they partner with Sime Darby, which is a reputable brand in itself, but they also built or engineered trust in Malaysia per se, right? So this is how some of the global brands or like some of the international brands influenced by the inflation at one point of time or the cost of living at the same time the brand power of the China local market is spreading into the region. So summarize what it is for us, what's the implication, and how do we actually navigate some of these new realities? So all these pressure drivers are not standalone. Energy shock, confidence shift, or the national brand shift, all of this are happening at the same time. It's all landing as many of you are marketeers who is dialed into the call on your plate at the same time, right? So how do you adapt to it? One of the critical aspects is to have your own unique value proposition. Let me try to move the slide a bit. Yes, having on value ecosystem would definitely help you in terms of positioning to your consumer, because consumers are shifting across all the spending dimensions, right? But that doesn't mean that they are going to abandon the trusted brands, but you need to have the SKUs accessible, right? Whichever that they are going to, you need to have a flexible payment option, because no longer I can pay everything upfront, right? You can also you need to also be very careful in your messaging, right? So a price stability at this point of time will go a long way, right? And being more empathetic to the situation in your messaging would add on to your value equation as well. So the question from us for you is that, have you actually looked to your portfolio? Has it been structured to win into the current situation, right? Or have you started applying something to gain as an opportunity from the situation as well? But it's also about earning trust through local relevance. 2024 and 2025, we have seen the consumers of Malaysia boycotting brand because of the global geopolitical sentiment, right? But at the same time, the Malaysian consumers rewarded the brand, which, or acknowledged them when they actually contributed positively to the society and community, right? So have we understood the Malaysian realities per se, and or are we operating from a global script or a local script? And also, this local script, is it adapted to a Sarawak, East Coast, or West Coast Malaysia, right? Because you cannot play it everything. So you have to understand the reality of each of this market as you move forward. So to leave with, and of course, you can get this report by whichever sectors that you are coming from, whether it is automotive, FMCG, or financial services. We have to adapt it to your local category particularly. But one thing is, what we can leave you with is the change is real. Consumers are restructuring. Some of our clients say that we are waiting for it to pass. For me and for people who are in Ipsos who is doing insight, this looks like a gamble. If you are not acting now, you might miss your consumer at this point of time. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining again. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have that you would want us to answer.
Hey Arun, just to jump in, we have a few questions actually in the chat box now. I can direct you maybe to the first question here, coming from Jim. Jim is from Grab, joining us today. So the question coming from Jim would be, how should we think about credit facilities tied to our products or services at times like this? On one hand, credit facilities can be a lifeline for certain segments to weather through the crisis. On the other hand, there is a risk of being seen as opportunistic.
So it would be seen an opportunistic, because if your message is going to be immediately happening now, right? But if you have, pay later, which has been applicable in most of the products when you are say, or pay in installments, right? Those facilities are already there. It is, but whether this facility is now accessible to all, right? The other day I heard from a client that KFC has the option coming up with pay later. Right. So that means that, if I'm buying a bucket of fried chicken, I can actually pay in installments. Right. So the question is that one thing, if you position your messaging in the sense that you are making finance accessible to a wider section of the society, that is a positive messaging. Right. And that's probably a spin that you can actually take it on. Right. Are consumers feeling they have less to spend due to inflation, or just simply rechanneling the spend? We haven't seen the aspect of less spent at this point of time. We are seeing that consumers being more cautious at this point, right? Less spend come from the aspect when there is a massive layoff or massive job losses, and the economy is not working, but the economy still seems to be functioning and seems growing as well, at least some section of the economy. So it's more of rechanneling the spend, as in the sense that I was planning to buy a car or a house, I probably delay it till the things are more clearer to me, right?
So Arun, we have one more question that just came into the chat box, coming from Shi Wei. Question would be, the consumer confidence index is in a decreasing trend. Why Malaysia automotive market is still active and having high sales? And is this trend sustainable on higher purchase items?
So what we have seen, the data that we have is as of April, right? And April is where we have seen a stark shift. right? But if that trend continues, that means that the confidence going downward trends, and or in the sense that they are kind of flatlining around there, then we will see how that is going to impact our automotive or hire purchases per se, right? But we have still have the inertia. Inertia is a big thing. You're coming from an ascending space, right? So we would have already booked our cars way ahead, and we would be book. So that sale part of it will continue, but if the confidence is not able to gain back, we are not, addressing the conflict and, the fuel prices and everything, then on a long run, it will definitely have impact on the fuel purchase. It might not reflect this month or the next month, but it would eventually impact if it is going to be, yeah. So is there a shift in brand choices from branded goods to house brands or lower price segments? So this is what some of our researchers has been going on in terms of would it go into white label goods, right? Say, for example, so which brand are you going to trust? Is it, a village grocer or an FMCG product if they have similar products out there, right? So that shift, we would say that it's a default of an inflation or higher cost of living in terms of trading down per se, particularly the branded goods for FMCG. If we said I used to buy something from Australia, milk, whatever, now I would rather trade down into another. But if they give the same nutritional value, right? Any indication of affluent segment remain optimistic on international level and premium categories? And you're absolutely right, Jim. Our data all point out that affluent segment is still positive about at the. It's always what we say is a K-shaped economy, right? So we would say that it has to take a real long-term effect, unless you are living in Dubai and you are trying to find a private jet to get out of the country, then you are a bit more anxious. But the rest of the world probably still affluent segments would be still optimistic.
Arun, just to pause you there, Arun. Just to
Yeah.
pause you there. There's a few questions that we can address first that we might have missed out earlier. A question coming in from Lily. So her question, thanks again, Lily, for the question. So the question will be for improved perception towards Chinese brands. The example that was shown on the car household products was there, but what about for personal care products like paper products? Do they see the same?
Okay. So I think we all seen, I'll take a step back in answering from them, right? So we have all seen the Hallyu wave, the Korean waves, and right before that, we would have gone for international cosmetic brands, right? And then a big part of that cosmetic industry has shifted to the Asian brands, particularly the Korean brands, particularly, right? What we see now is, the early stage of China maxing, right? The scale in which the influence of Chinese brands coming along with the overall content and everything is going to be massive in the following months and years to come, right? And it will last for some times as well. So to answer your questions at this point, if a pinch is probably felt by Samsung, which is on the electronic products competing with Huawei and Honor or Xiaomi, but category after category, we would have that impact, right? So we recently had the government coming with a policy in terms of EV vehicles, so that BYD has to change its stance and policy because government stepped in to support the local manufacturer from Proton and Perudua, which is the EV vehicle as well, right? So unless there is a step from the government on a particular category by category, even for paper product, and it would it might not be immediately, we would see it will come in stages, and you will have to carefully monitor the consumer shifts and behavior over a period of time.
Yeah. Thanks, Arun. So there's a few more questions trickling in, but let us address the question from Amy first. So Amy's question is, are we seeing consumer prioritizing wellness, convenience, or premiumization more when purchasing appliances, such as shavers, hair dryers, and whatnot? So it's a question coming in from Amy.
Okay. So wellness has been a concept which has been trending. We have the global trend survey, and it has seen that well-being and wellness has been trending up over a period of time. I would be a bit conscious on the premiumization at this point of time. But again, we have to look at into category by category per se, and we can deep dive into category. At this point, at an overall lens, premiumization of some of the products, we need to be careful because when people are very anxious and conscious of the inflation, particularly, right? But we can definitely look into shavers and hair dryers, how we can actually look into, and we would have some data to help you with that as well. But it has to be looked in a category by category level.
Okay, so two more questions that have just come in, Arun. I think the one question coming from Tiffany. So question coming in from Tiffany would be ethnicity of Singapore and Malaysia is very similar. However, the influence of China and US is reverse percentage. Why would that be the case?
Very interesting as well, right? This was quite surprising for us as well to say that, ethnically in Singapore, you would have people of more Chinese origin versus in Malaysia, in percentage. Of course, in absolute, Malaysia has probably more of people of Chinese origin per se. So this was very interesting in terms of how I think only answer I have is that as a society, Malaysia is much more open to be influenced because it's always been influenced by a wide spectrum of the others. And we have more Chinese brands coming into Malaysia and setting up their offices in everyday life per se. And this, amplifying impact, right? Now, in your office, you would have somebody watching a drama or a content and others. And there is, imagine the number of Malaysians traveling to China, right? If I ask in our office as well, there's a lot more people moving to, going to Guilin or Changjajie or wherever the Chinese location, which I have never heard before. So it would be much less from a Singapore perspective, which what I have seen. So definitely is that probably in one term is that openness and the exposure is actually influencing in varying degree within Singapore and Malaysia per se.
Okay, so our next question coming in from Polim. So a question would be, is there an increase in the consumer habit in health context towards more of a preventative approach, and if this is more apparent only in certain SEC of the population?
On the health context, we didn't. We have some data from our, again, as I mentioned, our global trend. This particular study, we are not focusing on the health aspect of it. What we know is that they won't compete on the nutritional aspect of the product that they're. I might trade down, but I'm not going to go for one product of which low quality, which we are probably quite sure about. But we don't have the wider context data as part of this study, but we have some other projects which covers that. Yeah.
Okay, so and question coming in from Sarah. In general, do we know how are the younger consumers reacting differently compared to older consumers during periods of geopolitical instability? Well, that's quite an interesting question for you, Arun.
So we have just released another report called Generations. We would definitely have a separate webinar on that, which speaks about different segments, like the silver generation and the Gen Z, and how each of the segments has been reacting. What we know is that in Asia particularly, we always notice that the younger consumers are optimistic, right? Because the economies are growing, there are a lot of opportunities to consume. The people are more optimistic at the overall level, right? So, and this is an age that you think there's a lot of things is within your control, right? So there seems to be positive. But when it comes to instability, what this data shows that both the younger and the older seems to be a bit more anxious, and there's more drop. Is the middle age, probably the millennial generation or the middle age generation, seems to be more stable and resilient when it comes to instability. But to get more into it, please wait for our next one, which is on generation. We will come back to you separately on that.
Okay, thanks, Arun. So a few more questions are coming in. Looks like it's coming fast and furious now as we close, as we go closer to the closing. Jim will get back to you on your question in terms of if there's any sharing from Southeast Asia and where you can get the information. We'll jump to Sam. So Sam's question would be, should marketers focus on performance marketing with heavy discounts to support the consumer's consumers navigate the inflation and come along as empathetic brands, or would focus on branding stories be more advantageous to brand for short to long term? What if the brand chooses to cut marketing spend significantly during this period?
I think, which is our natural instinct, right, for us to cut the spending, particularly the Marcom budget when we have a crisis as well, right? So I think, irrespective of how much budget, it's like how effectively you're using that budget to get your message across, right? One of the aspects that we would want to do is the stability and empathy. When you have an anxious consumer, you don't want to upset them more, right? So your messaging should be tuned towards that you were there in the past crises and you will be there, right? So as a global brand, an international brand, or like a local brand, whichever origin that you have it is, and I am empathetic to the situation that you are in, right? So if you would want to with that storyline, if you want to position and give discounts around that, that would be a thing. But it shouldn't create a behavior that I will always expect a discount from this brand forever, kind of situation as well, right? So definitely people would appreciate the discount from whatever that say that will prevent them to switch the brand or trade down or completely change the behavior. Definitely that should help. That's what our data says.
Okay, so thanks, Arun. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. So one question is coming from Lydia, in terms of her question being, from a regulatory perspective, should a brand place greater emphasis on empathetic content, such as prudent spending reminders and budgeting guidance during challenging times, as these content may be more relevant for general public?
Indeed, I have just seen a communication of something similar in India. And in fact, it came from the Prime Minister himself in terms of how do you be more prudent in terms of their spending, right? Or like travel, or in terms of, particularly on gold purchase, because the forex has been impacted as well, right? So the regulatory, so some of the regulatory, I have seen something similar from Indonesia as well, where the central banks have sent out some communication to that. And I think at the beginning of the April, something in Thailand as well, right? So there are regulatory bodies across the region itself has been sending or emphasizing some of the communication to the consumers to say that, not to trigger more of an alarm, because we need to be very careful that this actually triggers a bit of concern. Oh, can we not actually manage our situation more in the aspect of that, and over, I think that there is a behavioral shift that we have seen, before, that consumers want to be more prudent and more saving in terms of their spending per se. Emphasize on those lines, and that some of you have been already been communicating, probably amplify a bit in during this period, right? A completely different communication line would probably alert them or alarm them at this point of time, right? But amplifying on what you are already doing and giving a spin towards more savings would help.
Right. Thanks, Arun. So we have time maybe for one more last question. Just to mention to everyone else, if you have any other questions that you'd like to share to Arun, please do share them over in the chat box. After the session is over, we'll be more than happy to get in touch with you just to address any of the questions you have. But we'll take one more question from Siti Naiza, being, do you think consumers are more affected by actual economic pressures or by uncertainty and sentiment arising from the Iran conflict when it comes to major purchase decisions? Yeah, something that you discovered mainly in the interview you just did, Arun, I think.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. The fact that it's your travel actually costs more, and then there is this creeping inflation. We all kind of notice that it is actually inflation on the pump prices per se. Of course, there is a subsidy limit for the pump prices, which helps greatly for a lot of segments of consumers. But it's also it's actually would eventually creep through the agricultural product, the packaging, and everything, right? And consumers are very alert about this. That's what we have seen. Highly sensitive to the price changes is one part. But of course, the uncertainty is the overall effect, right? Because if the uncertainty on the Iran conflict, which is played in social media, a number of times, a bit, that would relax consumers a bit more, right? So then they would focus. Now there's a domestic economic situation and also the global worries per se. Both are playing to the consumer's mind.
Okay, thank you so much, Arun. I think we've covered mainly most of the questions that were shared today. Arun, do you think we have time for one more question?
Let's go with
Yeah, okay,
that.
just one last one. Yeah, since we're just about to end. So one last question coming in from Andre, being how can financial institutions contribute in addressing changes in consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think one aspect of it is that financial institution definitely can play a significant role at this point of time, right? So we are not in a situation like COVID where you have to write off the interest rates or mortgage loans and others, right? So that's nowhere near that kind of an expectation is there in the market per se, right? So one of the thing is that what people are expecting at this point of time is stability, right? So if I think I'm sure that the central bank is conscious not to raise the interest rates and others at this point of time, right? That would have a ripple effect on the consumer confidence more and more, right? So those are the things that we would. So if you are trying to adjust your prices, whether it's credit cards or mortgage or loans per se, this might not be the right time to do that, and that would send a completely wrong message to the others. And as we have just heard, communication, being more responsible with their finances. That's something that financial, that would be a communication. How can you help me to manage my finances better, right? And that's a perennial expectation from consumers as well. So if your messaging could be around there, that no, I will help you to manage your finances better, and through the products and solutions that you are offering, that would help to address some of the consumer changes per se. On the other side, we will have to, and we are happy to explore with you, like what kind of white spaces are there. We call them white spaces, right? Whenever there is a crisis, there is always an opportunity as well. So exploring the white spaces within the crisis for financial situation would be very interesting, right? So
Right. Thank you, Arun. And yeah, I think we've come to the end of the session today. So I'd like to say a big thank you, Arun, for the sharing today. We look forward to seeing everyone again for the next session. We will most likely have the next session towards the end of the year. So we'll be covering the second half of the year. This session today was covering first half. So we'll be most likely having the next session towards the end of the year. So thank you again, everyone. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you attending, taking some time from your busy schedule to join us for this session today. We look forward to seeing you again very soon at the next Ipsos webinar session. Thank you all. Take care. Have a great remainder of the week, and we will
thank
be
you
in
all.
touch with
Thanks for
you.
dialing in.
And the deck and the recording of the session will be shared to you after the webinar is over today. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.